Love had been raised in Virginia by a single mother who worked in state government and supplemented her income with nursing work on weekends. Dixon's blessing had nearly spelled ruination for Love's family. Love ran on school funding, expanded health care options and better jobs. Wearing his signature orange sneakers, he walked, knocking on doors across the rural expanses of the district, talking to people who had never felt part of the political process. Orange, in turn, became the color of his campaign. Now, a year later, Love was in Des Moines, Iowa. He was wearing an orange windbreaker from the 2018 campaign, but he wasn't running for anything. He was, instead, learning to be a campaign staffer at Arena Academy, a boot camp for progressives that hopes to place 450 graduates on Democratic presidential campaigns, and another 550 on down-ballot races of consequence. The broader hope is to replicate, if not mimic, the talent pipeline that has long sustained the conservative movement. I'm here because I want to learn what it takes to make sure that we can elect more folks who want to fully fund our public schools, expand health care access and, quite frankly, just leave our world better than we found it, Love said on the second of 5 days of training, which would culminate in a competitive campaign simulation. That's why I'm here. In rural North Carolina, we don't have that. A Democratic strategist, who asked for anonymity in order to speak frankly, agreed with that assessment. In past years, there were not serious investments made in data, technology, organizing, she explained. That was, in part, because Obama's own political activist group, Organizing for Action, paralleled the functions of the Democratic National Committee. Why would I give to the DNC when I can give to OFA, the Democratic strategist said, explaining how the former suffered to the advantage of the latter. And when Obama left office in 2017, she said, the infrastructure went with him. Our party was decimated. That is finally starting to change. Just days before the inaugural Arena Academy class showed in upwintry Des Moines, the DNC announced its own training program, Organizing Core 2020, which aims to train 1,000 rising college seniors to work on presidential campaigns. The training, which will be paid, will take place in swing states like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Florida. At the same time, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee has in-person trainings it calls DCCCU. Nor is the problem merely one of numbers. The first ever arena training, a second is scheduled in Charleston, SC, took place at a time of greater attention to how politicians treat their staffers, many of whom are young and underpaid. Senator Bernie Sanders, I Vermont, has been forced to acknowledge, however reluctantly, charges of sexism during his 2016 campaign. And another presidential aspirant, Senator Amy Klobuchar, D-Min, has faced allegations about the mistreatment of her own senatorial staff. In fact, as Arena Academy attendees listened to an opening session about the need for inclusivity and respect during the training, Twitter devoured the latest report about Klobuchar's alleged abuses, this one from the New York Times and involving a salad shoveling comb. Arena began as a series of gatherings in the wake of the 2016 election, almost like a Woodstock of politics, Gupta says, though presumably without the acid trips in muddy fields. Former presidential candidate Martin O'Malley attended, as did Tony Schwartz, ghostwriter for Donald Trump's The Art of the Deal. Gupta eventually quit his job as an operator of charter schools and joined forces with Kath Rall, who was running an agency that offered free support to progressive political candidates. In preparation for the 2018 midterms, Gupta and Kath Rall decided to provide free campaign coaching to more than 50 candidates who shared their progressive views. They recognized that while the desire to score a win against the Republican Party was great, many progressives were eager to run for office without much awareness of the demands such a run would require, especially if it were to result in victory. That whole world of consultants and vendors and the party is very complex and hard to navigate if you're doing this for the first time, Kath Rall says. Among the candidates Arena groomed was Lauren Underwood, who successfully won a House seat in suburban Chicago last November, becoming the youngest African American woman ever elected to Congress. A nurse by training, she decided to seek office out of alarm over Republican plans to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Alessandra Biaggi, another arena-supported candidate, won a critical seat in the New York State Senate, unseating a Democrat who often caucused with the chamber's Republicans. And at 27, Lina Hidalgo became the first Latina to ever lead Harris County, which includes the city of Houston and some of its suburbs. "I was nobody's priority except for my arena person," Underwood said of the support she received from Catherall, settling into a booth at the Hilton's restaurant after a cramped flight from Chicago. She and Hidalgo were among several alumni who came to Arena Academy last weekend. It is difficult to say just how influential Arena was in the 2018 election, since it was one of many groups, and hardly the most moneyed, to support Democratic candidates. Yet those candidates, like Underwood, say there was a marked contrast in how they were treated by the upstart organization versus the party's vital organs. Asked if the Democratic establishment had been helpful, Underwood retorted with a challenge of her own. "You define helpful," she said. "Their objective was to reclaim the majority," she explained. "I didn't get the sense that they specifically care how they did that." The best praise she could tender to the DCCC was its decision to abstain from backing one of the Democrats she was challenging. Other candidates were not so fortunate. In a Texas primary, the DCCC effectively scuttled the campaign of Laura Moser, who was deemed too liberal to win in the general election. But even with Catherall's help, Underwood struggled to hire staff for her campaign. Part of that, she freely acknowledges, had to do with the weather in Illinois. But meteorology, she knows, is no excuse. "We did not have the pipeline of qualified, experienced Democratic staff and operatives to work on these campaigns," Underwood says, "so when I was ready to hire staff, we were begging people. And they wouldn't come." They also wanted campaign staff to represent the diversity of the progressive movement. "The upper reaches of political consultancy are so male and so white that last year Politico called it the hardest glass ceiling in politics. And without women and people of color rising through the ranks of campaign staff, that ceiling will remain as firm as ever." To that end, Arena Academy attracted an inaugural staff that was majority female and minority white. It gave out full scholarships which included the cost of travel and lodging to 51% of its attendees. The overwhelming majority of those scholarships, 70%, were granted to people of color. "The diversity is kind of on the surface level when it comes to Democratic politics," says Shaniqua McClendon, political director of Crooked Media and one of the moderators at an opening day panel for Arena Academy. "Diversity," McClendon argues, "is not only a moral imperative but a political one, especially at a time when issues of race and representation are matters of fierce public debate." She points to Senator Elizabeth Warren's response to challenges about her Native American background, which culminated in a widely criticized video. "Imagine if she had an advisor who was Native American," McClendon says, the implication being that there was surely a smarter, more genuine way to answer Trump's taunts of Pocahontas. Like several other attendees, Afzal had already run for office. Last year she decided to seek a seat on the DuPage County Board. It was a campaign she waged largely out of the living room of her parents' house while she was attending college. "I didn't realize how difficult it would be," Afzal says. "Everything we did was kind of on the fly." Losing the race made her more determined to find out what it would take to win. Though many of the attendees were young, some were well into middle age. Jean Valencia McClendon is nearing 60, the last time she ran for anything, it was for president of her high school class, she lost. She eventually moved from her home in the Santa Barbara, California, region to Silicon Valley, where she worked in technology and raised 2 children. For many years, her most significant political activity was forcing a real estate developer to curb the scale of a luxury home project. Then, in January 2015, Stanford swimmer Brock Turner was charged with sexually assaulting another student who had too much to drink at a campus party. The judge who presided over Turner's case, Aaron Persky, a Stanford graduate, handed Turner a lenient 6-month jail term, citing a huge collateral consequence for Mr. Turner based on the conviction. McClendon came to Arena in order to bolster what she learned during the Hendrickson campaign, especially since she has her sights on something more ambitious. "My goal is to find the right person to run against Devin Nunes," she says, referencing the Fresno area congressman who is a close ally of President Trump. She won't be able to run that campaign from her family room recliner. Much as progressives may need a training model, Gupta says he and Cathrall have no interest in replicating the command and control structure of conservative activist groups like those funded by the billionaire Koch brothers and others. "They're ahead of us in infrastructure, but I don't think recreating their infrastructure is going to be in our interests," he says. There is much to admire about the right's ability to recruit, retain, and deploy, but Gupta envisions a progressive jazz ensemble, with some freedom to improvise, in response to what he describes as a highly scripted marching band mentality on the opposing side. As for the training sessions themselves, they presented a crash course that sought to quickly inculcate the attendees into the basics of campaign management. And basics is where things began. On the first day, that involved something as simple as explaining call time, or the practice of having candidates make fundraising calls. But a couple of days later, an overhead projector in the breakout session for campaign organizers included the phrases "building a culture of data integrity" and "targeting, building, and tiering voter universes." The attendees discussed, among many other topics, whether it was better to call potential voters or send text messages. The lecturers kept things moving briskly, frequently leavening the mood with humor. One of the moderators, Dewanna Thompson of WokeVote, urged her students to pay attention to the methods so effectively used by the Tea Party in 2010. "It was a movement, whether y'all like it or not," she said. As for the campaign jobs, many attendees were thinking about those well before the training was through. Upon discovering that Senator Kamala Harris, the Democrat from California now running for president, was staying at the same hotel where Arena Academy was taking place, a trainee accosted the candidate in the gym one morning, presenting her with a resume. "You're gangsta," Harris said the following morning as she related the story of the encounter to peals of laughter during a surprise cameo at a morning Arena session, before preparing to barnstorm across the state. She said she'd given the resume to her sister Maya, who is chairing the Harris campaign. Then she got serious. "Elections matter," Harris said, repeating a refrain that has become popular with progressives since Trump's win. "And those elections can't be won without the unglamorous work of crunching numbers and knocking on doors." Harris said it, then said it again. "The end goal," she said of the 2020 election, "will chart the course of the future of our country." And then she said it one last time, "Elections matter."